In 2013, 4,000 people boarded the Carnival Triumph for a 4-night cruise to Cozumel, Mexico. And for the first 3 days, everything lived up to their guests' expectations. All-you-can-eat food, entertainment, swimming, excursions. It was the vacation that everyone was hoping for. But then on day 4 at 5:30 a.m., there was a fire in the engine room, which left everyone stranded at sea for 4 more days. And during that time, the power to the ship was cut, the AC no longer worked, the sewage overflowed, and though no one died, the situation was literally and figuratively a mess. And Carnival refunded everyone's ticket after some legal battles and gave each passenger a $500 gift card for their troubles and had to spend over $115 million to repair the ship. Now, it would be an understatement to say that what has been affectionately named the poop cruise was a disappointment. People had so many expectations for relaxation, fun, and lifelong memories, and they only got really 1 out of the 3, the lifelong memories. And that's how disappointment works. We expect certain things, and those things don't come to pass. Now, as big of a train wreck Carnival was, at the end of the day, everyone got back something for their trouble, right? But what do we do about disappointments in life that don't get a $500 refund? And more specifically for today's message, what do we do for those of us who follow God? What do we do when God disappoints us? That's a question that the prophet Haggai looks to answer. And to best understand the prophet Haggai, we need to look back 6 decades to this event known as the Babylonian exile. And if it sounds like I'm repeating myself, you've heard this sermon before, it's because I'm definitely repeating myself. But also, this event outside of the Exodus is the most talked about moment in the Old Testament. So if there's anything to get familiar with, I would recommend it's this event, it's the exile, because it will help you not only to understand the Old Testament better, but also have a deeper appreciation for the New Testament and how Jesus is the answer to the problem of our constant exile. But anyways, back to the exile. If you're not familiar, in 586 BC, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon invaded Jerusalem, ended the royal dynasty of King David, destroyed the temple, and deported the Israelites from their homeland. Then in 539 BC, the Persian Empire took over and allowed Jewish exiles to return home, though it would be under far different circumstances. Instead of being an independent nation, they would now be considered a Persian province called Yehud. Now, many of the people who made up Yehud were born during the exile period, which meant they belonged to a generation entering their homeland for the first time in 47 years. And there was a lot of excitement and momentum for rebuilding what was lost, and that included the temple. Up until the exile, the temple was the heartbeat of the Jewish community. They believed that this was the place where heaven and earth met and where the fullness of God's presence dwelt. Now, of course, Jews believed that God was everywhere and couldn't be contained in a building, but they also took seriously that God chose to be present in a special way in this one location. Psalm 132 puts it like this: "For the Lord has chosen Zion," another name for the location of the temple. He has desired it for his dwelling place. This is my resting place forever. Here I will dwell, for I have desired it. And this meant that the temple was the place to meet God in a unique way. It was here you received his forgiveness through animal sacrifices. It was here you worshiped him with other people. It was here you partook in ceremonies and rituals that reminded you of who God has called you to be, which is a blessing to the entire world. So there was a real urgency to get the temple up and running, and at first, things were heading in the right direction. Cyrus, the king of Persia, backed and funded the project. There was a group of people ready to get the job done, and they were able to lay the foundation of the temple within 2 years of returning. But then things changed. When Xerxes became king of Persia, he halted the temple project after being warned that the people of Yehud could not be trusted to pay taxes or remain loyal to Persia. So the project was completely canceled. Then 19 years later, Haggai receives a word from the Lord, and here's what he says. Then the word of the Lord came through the prophet Haggai. Is it a time for you yourselves to be living in your paneled houses while this house remains a ruin? Now this is what the Lord Almighty says. Give careful thought to your ways. You have planted much, but harvested little. You eat, but never have enough. You drink, but never have your fill. You put on clothes, but you are not warm. You earn wages only to put them in a purse with holes in it. This is what the Lord Almighty says. Give careful thought to your ways. Go up into the mountains and bring down timber and build my house so that I may take pleasure in it and be honored, says the Lord. If you didn't know everything that had happened just before the book of Haggai, his message might sound like a simple rebuke. The people came home, they got comfortable, they built nice houses, focused on their jobs, and tried to get back to normal, but completely neglected God's temple. And you could read the story that way. And honestly, we all need that kind of reminder sometimes that we're not always great at putting God first. But I don't think that's what Haggai is really about. Haggai is not just a message about misplaced priorities. It's a message about how to respond to disappointment. Think about it this way. When the temple was destroyed, the tragedy wasn't just that a building fell. The real tragedy was that God was the one who allowed it to fall. If the temple was a symbol of God's unique presence and closeness with Israel, then its destruction sent a loud and painful message. The message was, God is no longer here. He's no longer close. In the words of Hosea, they are no longer his people and he is no longer their God. So from the Jewish perspective, the relationship was broken beyond repair. There was no coming back from this. But then, 47 years later, God does the unthinkable. He ends the exile. He brings his people back to the land he promised. And naturally, everyone is thinking the impossible has just happened. God is with us again. Let's rebuild the temple and let's go. But then they hit their first roadblock and they quit. I don't think it's because they didn't care about God or misprioritized things, but it's because I think the temple was left undone because the latest setback made them wonder if God still cared about them. And so rather than risk more disappointment with this whole temple business, maybe they turned toward anything else that might satisfy them. They thought maybe if their houses were rebuilt, maybe if the crops came in, maybe if there was enough money, then they'd finally feel at rest and finally feel at home. If you've ever been disappointed with God, and if you haven't, don't worry, you will, you've probably tried to do this exact same thing because sometimes God doesn't come through like you expected. Sometimes that prayer doesn't get answered. Sometimes God seems absent when you need him the most. And when God disappoints us, it's tempting to redirect our hope towards something else or someone else. But Haggai shows us that never works. The people of Yehud spent 19 years trying to rebuild their lives and recover what was lost without God. But as Haggai points out, it added up to nothing. They ate but stayed hungry. They drank but were still thirsty. They earned money only to put it in a bag full of holes. Nothing satisfied. So what was the solution? Well, Haggai gives it. It's turn back to God. Haggai calls them to get back to building the temple and reminds them that if God promised the temple would be rebuilt and that he himself would dwell there, then no setback can stop God from fulfilling what he said. And here's the thing, Haggai's sermon is so good, the people actually take notes and do exactly what he says. And within 2 months, the temple is rebuilt. And you would think that this story ends here with a happily ever after moment. But there's just one problem, and that problem is the new temple doesn't meet expectations. Now, for the older generation, the few folks who are left who remembered the first temple, they're disappointed because the new temple can never be the old one. This will never be the one that King Solomon built. This will never hold the Ark of the Covenant in the Holy of Holies. And this temple will only be a painful reminder that no matter what they do, things will never be the way they used to be. And some of us know this feeling, and we don't got to be old to know it. If you've lost a loved one, if a friendship ended, if you were laid off from a job you enjoyed, if you've been coming to this church since the 90s, and there are some things that were here back then that aren't here today, oh, you know disappointment. Now, that's the older generation. Meanwhile, for the younger generation, those who have never seen the first temple, things still felt off. Sure, the temple was back, but they were still under Persia's rule. God promised that he would also restore David's family to the throne, but as of October 21st, 520 BC, the throne remains empty. And David's descendant, Zerubbabel, is a Persian employee, not a king. So for them, the temple stood as a symbol that things did not turn out the way we wanted them to be. And we all know about how that feels too. Maybe you were excited about that move, that job, that marriage, that trip, that ministry. And then suddenly you realize the house is a mess, that marriage is hard, your boss is rusty, and the future you wanted is nowhere to be seen. Haggai responds to those both longing for the past and disappointed with their future with this message. Both the older generation and the younger generation, Haggai has something to say to them, and it's this: who of you is left who saw this house in its former glory? How does it look to you now? Does it not seem to you like nothing? But now be strong, Zerubbabel, declares the Lord. Be strong, Joshua, son of Jozadak, the high priest. Be strong, all you people of the land, declares the Lord, and work, for I am with you, declares the Lord Almighty. This is what I covenanted with you when you came out of Egypt, and my spirit remains among you. Do not fear. This is what the Lord Almighty says. In a little while, I will once more shake the heavens and the earth, the sea and the dry land. I will shake all the nations, and what is desired by all nations will come, and I will fill this house with glory, says the Lord Almighty. The silver is mine, and the gold is mine, declares the Lord Almighty. The glory of this present house will be greater than the glory of the former house, says the Lord Almighty. And in this place I will grant peace, declares the Lord Almighty. First, Haggai pretty much says to the people, you're right. To the old folks, he says, the temple isn't what it was, and it seems like nothing to you. And then he turns to the next gen and he says, the temple isn't what you expected and it seems like nothing to you. But then he says to Zerubbabel, Joshua, and to the people to be strong because God is with them. What's interesting here is how Haggai names Zerubbabel and Joshua, even though these two leaders are pretty much proof to the people that God had failed once again. Zerubbabel is a descendant of King David. So if God's promises were true, he'd be sitting on the throne, not working as a governor under Persia. And if Joshua is a descendant of the high priest, he was supposed to represent the people before God in the temple. But because the Ark of the Covenant, the place where God's presence lives, is gone, that made Joshua a second-rate priest in a second-rate temple. So together, Zerubbabel and Joshua are living proof to the people that God's promises seem broken. Yet Haggai insists that God's promises still stand. The same God who brought his people out of Egypt, who created the heavens and the earth, the sea, and everything in it, he has not failed. Rather, the real failure lies in the expectations of his people. To those lamenting that things won't be the way they used to be, Haggai's message is that God is getting ready to do a new thing. But to be a part of it, they must let go of the way God used to work in the past. Yes, the OG temple was amazing. It changed lives. Maybe back when it was around, there were 4 services when 100 kids in Sunday school, the music was better and the preaching was shorter. But Haggai's message is that the old temple isn't coming back. And not because God doesn't care about you, but because God's vision is bigger than the nostalgia of the older generation. And meanwhile, to the younger generation, those saying, this isn't how we hoped things would turn out, Haggai has a word for them too. And the word is God is preparing to do something better. But to be a part of it, they have to let go of their version of the future. Some of them imagined the ideal outcome. Zerubbabel would be crowned as king, and Joshua would fully step into his role as high priest, and Israel would rise again as a superpower. And their disappointment came when none of that dream came true. But again, Haggai's point is that it is not because God failed or forgot. It's because God's plan was better than the younger generation's imagination. So you must be wondering, what was this bigger and better plan that God had? Well, the New Testament tells us God gave us himself in Jesus. The people wanted Zerubbabel. God gave them the King of Heaven. The people wanted Joshua. God gave them the great high priest. Instead of an ark, he gave us his son. Instead of putting his presence in the temple, God put his presence in everyone who believes in him. And instead of establishing a kingdom for just Jerusalem, Jesus promises to create one for every nation, tribe, and tongue, and to put it under his rule. What God did in Jesus is bigger than what the older generation wanted to return to, and it's better than what the younger generation was hoping for. And what caused the disappointment, once again, was not God's inability to deliver on his promises, but the problem was with his people's expectations of how he would fulfill his word. So what's the lesson for today? I think it's this. If we can be honest, we all have broken expectations of God. Now, we know that the correct thing to believe is that God knows best, but so often what we really believe is, I hope God will only do what I think is best. And we have all these expectations that God is going to act in a certain way and love us a certain way and be there for us in a certain way. And then God doesn't do what we want him to do, and we get disappointed. Last month, we had Dr. Roy Lawson with us, and one of the best morsels of wisdom he shared with me was this. Don't expect God to honor your unrealistic expectations. This will only lead to bitterness. Life will not always turn out how we hope, and we can be faithful followers of Jesus and do all the right things, and we might still find ourselves disappointed. And the question we need to ask ourselves when that happens is, do we have a faith that does not depend on what we can see or imagine? It's easy for us to read Haggai with hindsight because we know what God was doing. We know nothing went as planned because what God was going to do through Jesus was far better. But the people in Haggai's day, they didn't get to see God's promise fulfilled. They didn't get to see it. Their kids didn't get to see it. Their grandkids didn't get to see it. It took another 500 years for God to deliver. That meant for the people Haggai was speaking to, they had to decide, will I still trust God? Will I still teach my children to be faithful? Will I still let go of my expectations and endure all these disappointments and still proclaim that he is good, even if it means I die without ever understanding why God didn't act in my lifetime? Those are tough questions to answer, but they're questions you and I have to wrestle with too, because even in our own lives, God doesn't always give us reasons for every decision he makes. But we do get to choose how we respond to the disappointment. We can choose to find hope in anyone other than God, or we can choose to put our hope in the one who has proved faithful to Haggai's generation and will be just as faithful to do good for ours. And my prayer is that we choose the latter.